And there I stand. My heart's beating a little faster. My palms are a little sweaty. And I look down, and that ground is really far away. I'm standing on a place I've stood many times before, but it doesn't matter in this moment. In this moment, my internal side is going like Z. Ah! I don't know about this. And then I step off, and the zip line catches me, and I'm off to point B. Have you ever been zip lining before? There's a thing that I have found in zip lining. And it's that it doesn't matter how many times I've done it. The first time I get ready to do it after not having done it for a while, there's a lot of doubts that I have. There is a lot of anxiety that could just as easily be excitement, and as soon as I'm off, it will become just pure excitement and joy. But it's not that yet. When you stand and look at the platform's edge, and you get ready to step off into nothing. There's a space, though. There's a space that seems to expand. Right as the zipline instructor says, all clear. And in that space, time seems to stand still. And every doubt, every hesitation, is the skier going to hold? Did the instructor put me in appropriately? All of these things run through my mind, and they finish the statement, clear, and I'm off. But that space is important for me. Even if it only lasts half a heartbeat in reality. Because what I have to do when I step off the platform is trust completely. And there's nothing in between that will get me off the platform. This month in our series of worship, we are in adoration, which simply means a deep love or respect of God. We are working on turning our lives oriented towards worship in the spaces where we gather on Sunday morning and in our very lives as we go about encountering God. We're basing this whole series off of this verse in Deuteronomy. In chapter 6, it's called the Shema, which means to listen. And we learned last week that the first step in adoration to live a life of this Deuteronomy call is to turn our ear, to do the very first thing that the verse tells us to. Listen, O Israel. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Wear these things around your forearm, your forehead. Post them on your doors. Wake up with them. Go to sleep with them. Live your life oriented towards God. And so we learned that the first thing we have to do if we're going to live a life of adoration is turn our ear towards God. And in that turning our ear towards God, we remember why. Why do we show up in this space? Why do we worship? What is our personal invitation to do this work? And this week is only as appropriate as it is Valentine's Day later this week. We turn to the next step, which is turning our hearts towards God. Turning our hearts in adoration, in deep love, deep respect of who God is. So if turning our ear is our why, then turning our heart is trust. And there's a story that illustrates this very well in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 8, beginning in verse 5. And it goes like this. When Jesus went to Capernaum, a centurion approached, pleading with him, "Lord, my servant is flat on his back at home, paralyzed, and his suffering is awful." Jesus responded, "I'll come and heal him." But the centurion replied, "Lord, I don't deserve to have you come under my roof. Just say the word and my servant will be healed. I'm a man under authority with soldiers under me. I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes. I say to my servant, 'Do this,' and the servant does it." When Jesus heard this, he was impressed and said to the people following him, "I say to you with all seriousness that even in Israel, I haven't found faith like this. I say to you that there are many who will come from the east and the west to sit down to eat with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the children of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness. People, there will be weeping and grinding their teeth." Jesus said to the centurion, "Go. It will be done for you just as you have believed." And his servant was healed that very moment. When I come across this servant, my mind jumps to maybe not the most logical place. But I wonder what the story of the servant looks like. I wonder what it was like to be laying there suffering and paralyzed, and in a moment where no one, your centurion boss is nowhere near you, and all of a sudden, you're completely healed. There are many spaces in this story to wonder and ask questions of the text and invite God into the midst of answering what is happening in your own soul. But this morning, I don't want to go down my own paths. Instead, I want to focus on two. First is the centurion, and the second is the teaching moment Jesus has. So to the first one, the centurion. Whenever I come to a word like that in the Bible, what I first have to do is turn off my seminary brain. And I have to pull from my knowledge, and I have to look up sources that are all about the Roman Empire. A centurion isn't a Jewish term. It's not a biblical term. It's not something theological. Instead, a centurion was a soldier in the Roman Empire. A centurion was the one who would wear the breastplates like we would think of, and the gold shin guards, and the red robes and the skirts. But he also was the one that had the chain denoting that he is of higher status than the other soldiers around him. Centurions were actually the leaders of squadrons, and these squads would come together at wartime when the emperors would say, "We are moving on this piece of land." All these squads would assemble and they would move forward. But here's one of the unique things about centurions that are different than other war leaders. Instead of standing in the very back and watching how the battle rages on, they are the very front line. The most important of the squad is put at the very front. And they were good. They were so good that some of the emperors of Rome even included them in their war strategy meetings. They were smart. They were well-oiled machines. They were leaders for the Roman Empire. Now we can place the centurion back in our story. This is a man who has no knowledge of the Jewish rituals. He doesn't know the Torah like the back of his hand. He's not someone who has been raised knowing that there would one day be a Messiah, a Savior that would be coming to save not just Israel, but even more. And yet, without having any of this knowledge, he knew something to be true about Jesus. And I wonder what it was. Was it the stories that the people told of Jesus? The whispers he heard when walking around town? I wonder if it was him catching a glimpse of Jesus having a teaching moment while in Capernaum. I wonder what it is, what it was. We don't know. But what we do know is that I imagine there were sweaty hands and a racing heartbeat. And in the space of a moment, he stood up straight and he approached Jesus, the crowd parting because it's a centurion and no one gets in the way of a centurion. And he tells Jesus, "Heal my servant." And he says it knowing to his very core that it would happen. I want to be able to trust like that. But here's the reality. Jesus has this teaching moment, and I can't help but not place myself in the shoes of the centurion most often, but instead as one of the ones following Jesus, hearing the words that he says to the crowd. I can't help but hear Jesus saying that I have created this table. Something he said all the time, right? Jesus spent a lot of time around tables, eating at tables, speaking in metaphor and parables about tables. And I like this image. I want to be at this table. I want to be at a table where Abraham and Isaac are eating. I want to be at the table that all of my Jewish upbringing, all of my Christian upbringing has taught me that I am going to have a seat at. That there are going to be others that Jesus is creating a seat for from the east and from the west to come and have a space. That sounds good. But then Jesus says, many of you will be thrown out into the dark. And I think, man, Jesus, that's really harsh. But yet I can see it. I can feel that if I'm really honest with myself. You see, I've grown up in the church. And sometimes I have some baggage. And I imagine many of us who have grown up in the church or been around the church long enough that maybe there's times where we have some baggage that we bring, and it's unique and it's different compared to each of our stories and our contexts. But how do we get to be one of the ones of Israel to sit at the table? Because I don't want to be out grinding and gnashing my teeth. And I realized that it's all about trust. It's all about how we turn our hearts to God. It was so easy for the centurion. He saw it, he knew it, he did it. It was even part of what was trained into him as the Roman Empire trained him to be able to turn his attention and his focus to what is true and move towards it with precision. But I don't have that gifting. And so if this is the space that maybe some of us find ourselves in, what do? Is there hope for us? Well, it's all in the way we define trust. So trust, first and foremost, is it's not about blindly going. in ignoring everything around us. I'm living a hashtag blessed life, but everything around me is falling apart and I'm just not going to acknowledge it. It's not about living a hashtag blessed life because my life is really good, but I see that there's hurt in the world, but I'm just not going to look at it because my life is okay. That's not the kind of trust God's asking for. Instead, God is asking for a trust that leans in and leans in hard. God is asking us to trust God when we have a doubt, to lean in and believe that the God we serve and love is bigger than our doubt. To lean in with that doubt and to invite God to the table to have a conversation with us. That God can handle whatever doubt we have. That God can handle the thing that makes us feel like we are not worthy of God, but instead that we would lean in to that feeling of not having enough worth, not living the right life, not doing the right things, and offer it to God to redeem. That God would ask us to take those hidden things of our hearts that we don't even want to speak out loud and lean in by sharing them with God. Whether it be hesitations or worries or questions about why bad things happen to good people. God's inviting us to lean in and trust God with any and all of those things. And if we do this work of leaning in and offering to God these things, to sit with us at a table of silence and just be present with us, to lean in and offer these things as wrestlings that we want to physically fight God over, if we are willing to offer these things to God, to have a theological discussion that lasts long after the coffee has grown cold, then we are doing the work of trusting God. And God will answer in turn. Sometimes quickly, in a heartbeat of a moment, sometimes over the duration of our life. Because here's the other option. The other option is that we can go about not handing these things to God. We can go about ignoring the things around us, the things in our lives, the things in the world that make us have questions. And when we get to heaven, what we might then realize is that who I was trusting my heart to was no one more than myself. So are we going to trust God with the hard things and with the good things of our lives? Or are we going to trust our ability to go through the motions to save us? And I think if we live in this space of just trusting our own abilities, then we'll never step off the zip line platform. Or at least I wouldn't. I don't even trust myself that much. We will live in a space where we can only go so far as trusting who we are. And maybe a little bit of the couple of people we really trust in our inner circles. Or we can live a life where we trust God with everything that we have. And what we will find is that we're a lot more like the centurion than we realize. If we want to have hearts turned towards God in deep love and deep respect, then we have to trust God with everything. If we want to be in adoration of God with our hearts, then we must give our whole heart, not just the good stuff, but every piece of our heart towards God. So this week, as we head in towards Valentine's Day, a time of love, a time where we notice where the loves in our lives are, would we be willing to ask ourselves, the deepest love physically in our lives, whether of spouse or of family or of close friends, ask ourselves, what kind of conversations are we equipped to lean in with them? Are we able to share with them the hard things? And if we are, how are we offering that same kind of love on a grander scale to a God who loves us beyond measure? This week, may we be willing to trust God with everything that we have. Amen.